All right, let's jump right in. We're going to be breaking down a really fascinating study today from the journal Management Science. The authors, Caroline Flammer and Aleksandra Kacperczyk, ask a huge question. Does focusing a company on its stakeholders, its employees, its customers, the community, actually make it more innovative?
To put it a little more bluntly, is there a real, tangible payoff to putting people and the planet ahead of just grabbing short-term profits? I mean, this is one of the biggest debates in the business world, right? It pits that classic shareholder-first view against this much broader stakeholder perspective. And this research, it aims to find a real, evidence-based answer.
So here's our game plan. We're going to walk through this just like the researchers did. First, we'll dig into the tough question they're trying to answer. Then we'll look at the theories and hypotheses they came up with. After that, the really clever part, the natural experiment they used to get a clean result. Then we'll check out the evidence, and finally, we'll talk about what it all means.
Okay, first up, Section 1, a tough question. In any academic paper, this is where the authors set the stage. They're looking at what we think we know, and then they point to a huge, glaring hole in that knowledge.
And this is where they start. You hear it all the time, right? Big, successful companies like GE or IBM will say, oh yeah, listening to our stakeholders is key to our innovation. But the authors point out that as common as those stories are, actual, hard proof, that's been incredibly difficult to find. And here's why it's so hard. It's because of this massive research challenge called endogeneity. Honestly, it's just a fancy word for a classic chicken and egg problem. Think about it. Does being good to your stakeholders cause you to be more innovative? Or do companies that are already super innovative and profitable just have more cash lying around to be nice to everybody? A simple correlation can't tell you which one it is. And that's the puzzle this whole paper is designed to solve.
So, with that big problem on the table, let's move into Section 2. Theories and hypotheses. This is where the authors stop talking about the problem and start building the logical case for why focusing on stakeholders should, at least in theory, crank up a company's innovation.
And their whole argument really boils down to this: a tale of two horizons. On one side, you have that intense pressure from shareholders, which often forces managers to obsess over safe, predictable, short-term results, and that can just kill true innovation. But on the other side, you have this long-term stakeholder view. That kind of thinking can create a culture that actually encourages risk-taking, builds incredible loyalty with employees and customers, and, maybe most importantly, is okay with the failures that are just part of the process of inventing something new.
So from that big idea, they create some very specific testable predictions, or hypotheses. The big one, H1, is that a bigger focus on stakeholders leads to more innovation. Simple enough. Then they break it down. They predict it'll lead to more experimentation. More big wins, but also more flops. It should also boost how productive employees are at innovating. And finally, they predict the whole effect will be even stronger for companies selling right to you and me, the consumers, and in industries that are traditionally seen as very eco-friendly.
Okay, so having a theory is one thing, but how in the world do you actually test it? How do you get around that chicken and egg problem we talked about? Well, that brings us to Section 3, the natural experiment. This is where things get really, really clever. This is how they found a way to isolate cause and effect.
They found their solution in these things called constituency statutes. Now that sounds like a dry legal term, but the idea is pretty simple. These are actual laws passed at the state level that basically give a company's board of directors legal permission to think about the interests of people other than shareholders, employees, customers, the local community, without getting sued. And this is the absolute key. This law is an external shock. It's something that happens to a company, not something the company chooses to do.
And here's the magic. Not every state did this at the same time. As you can see from this timeline, these laws were adopted all over the place, at different points in time. This is what creates the natural experiment. It gives the researchers a perfect way to compare companies in states before and after the law passed, and compare them to companies in states where nothing changed at all. To actually measure the effect, they use a powerful statistical method called difference in differences. The easiest way to think about it is like a medical trial, but for companies. They look at the change in innovation for the treatment group, the firms in a state like Ohio after its law passed. Then they compare that to the change for the control group, firms in states that didn't have the law. By comparing the changes, they can filter out all the other noise in the economy and isolate the one thing they care about, the effect of the law itself. Which brings us to the moment of truth. Section 4, Evidence from the Data. After setting up this incredible experiment, what did they actually find when they crunched the numbers?
Well, the first major headline result is this. On average,
Companies saw a 6.8% increase in the number of patents they filed right after their state passed one of these laws. And this wasn't just a random fluke. This was a statistically significant result, tied directly to that legal change.
But it gets better. It wasn't just about cranking out more patents. They also found a 6.9% jump in the number of times each patent was cited by other patents. Now that's a really important measure of innovation quality. It means these companies weren't just filing more paperwork, they were producing more influential, more impactful ideas.
Now, I know a table like this can look a little intimidating, but let's just focus on the important bits. You can see those positive, significant numbers for the statute's effect on both patents and citations. But look at that pre-trend line. The effect in the year before the law passed is basically zero. This is huge. It's the proof that the companies weren't already on some different innovation path. The change really happened after the law. And the data gets even more interesting when you slice it up. This chart shows that the innovation boost was almost double for companies that sell directly to consumers, B2C firms, compared to companies that sell to other businesses. This gives real support to their hypothesis that having customers who are also stakeholders really juices the results.
Okay, so let's get to the final section and put all these pieces together. What does it all mean? This is where the authors step back from the specific numbers and talk about the bigger picture.
Well, they sum it up pretty directly themselves. They say, our findings support the view that stakeholder orientation plays an important role in fostering innovation. Basically, they provided some of the first really strong causal evidence for an idea that, until then, was mostly just a nice story. But that leads to a huge question, doesn't it? If this stakeholder focus is so great for innovation, which we all know is good for a company's value in the long run, then why don't all companies just do it? Why did it take a new law to make it happen?
The paper's answer comes down to what you could call a temporal trade-off. The constant pressure from capital markets for good quarterly numbers can make managers nearsighted. It pushes them to avoid big long-term bets like innovation. The value from a stakeholder approach, things like trust, reputation, employee loyalty, that stuff builds slowly. And sure enough, the study found no immediate financial pop from these laws, only gains down the road. So these laws act like a shield, giving managers the cover they need to resist that short-term pressure and invest for the long haul.
So let's wrap this up with the key takeaways. First, innovation seems to be a major way that focusing on stakeholders actually creates value. Second, for any managers listening, this shows that creating a culture of experimentation and empowering your employees really is critical. And third, for policymakers, it's a powerful reminder that the legal rules of the game can be a surprisingly effective way to nudge companies toward behavior that's better for everyone in the long run.
And that leaves us with a final, pretty fascinating question to chew on. If a relatively simple tweak to state corporate law can measurably unleash innovation, what other rules of the game in our economy, in our companies, should we be taking a hard second look at?